troubles and too much sin. Test will occur. Running a race we will never win without the word.
Good morning, good day, good evening, good overnight, whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome once again to Just Thoughts. We're going to be discussing the same subject as in the last Bible study. Earth. Young, ancient, or unknown. Again, let me remind you all that I am not here to attack anyone's personal beliefs. I may not be in agreement with many of them, but it's up to you that are listening to take things that I say at face value, and if need be, with a grain of salt. I'm only trying to make sense of documented evidences and the interpretations of those evidences of what they mean or what they might mean, and when necessary to give possible alternatives, that is to say alternative opinions, to what is commonly being taught out there or hypothesized, or even what is being called factual when it is clearly not that cut and dry and factual. The whole purpose of this being to try to better understand the world that we live in and the ages that have been, and to put things into a sensible perspective. That is to say, as sensible as I can, with what I have learned and what I have seen. There are things out there in our world which we do not understand and may never fully understand. There are things being taught as if they were the gospel truth today, and again, they are not that cut and dry. There are now movements which have taken off in the last 3, 4, maybe 5 decades, which clearly do not come from a truly Bible-based perspective, nor does science back them up. Whether it's subjective, well-done science or secular science, it really makes no difference. Now, aside of these things, that is to say opinions and theories and what have you, aside of these things, there are things which defy what is commonly believed about artifacts found on the earth which are unexplainable. Now, television channels such as Discovery Channel and National Geographic Channel and History Channel and other things conclude that some of the things found upon the earth are of alien origin or alien technology brought it here, when in fact that is very most highly unlikely. Just because things are found on this earth which are too advanced for what we know now, and the scientific point of view says that they come from outer space, that does not dictate that they are of alien origin. It is far more likely that their origin is Earth, or even heaven. That is to say, that the heavens ruled over by God. But not necessarily distant planets or distant galaxies far, far away. Our Earth was once very much more advanced than it is now. But Satan brought that to an end. And the remnants that we see now, which are very clearly extremely old or are out of place in time for the world that we understand, science cannot provide us with answers to explain them. And in some cases, biblical scholars can't explain them either. No one really knows why they're here, how they got here, or what they mean. That is, unless you look into our Father's Word and delve deep enough into our Father's Word to understand these things. Because these things, whether they are a product of Nephilim incursions upon humanity, or whether they are unexplained pieces of a bygone Earth age, they are more logically explained by what God has allowed us to know from His Word, rather than from a secular or simply science point of view. In other words, that aliens from other worlds are the reason that these things are here, and the reason also that we exist, because they planted the seeds of life on this planet. That's ludicrous. It is easy to understand how a flesh mind that is unlearned to certain biblical truths might succumb to that notion, or certain notions of alien advanced culture contact theories. However, that does not make it factual. Let us always realize that just because something looks a certain way, it does not necessarily follow that it is that way. Now, I can give you some examples, and of course we will be covering a lot of examples as we go through this particular talk. But the Answers in Genesis group, which I've aforementioned, which I have great respect for. I don't agree with all their theories or assumptions, but I do have great respect for them. But they have concluded that our Earth is 6,000, maybe 7,000 or so years old. And that all the levels of sediments that we see around the world were caused by the flood of Noah. And their evidence for this is that a great erratic flood flow scenario can in fact cut through many layers of sediments very quickly. And it is true that such things can happen. No one is denying that. But it is also true that layers upon this earth are proven to have been laid down slowly over extremely long periods of time. Meaning that the earth would have to be more than 6,000 or 7,000 years old. Even biblically, the earth would have to be 13, maybe 14,000 years old, just by the days of creation and the time since Adam to now. But the problem comes in when we are forced or told that we have to choose between these two explanations. In other words, we have to make the choice, whether we're with the faith-based Christians or whether we're with science. And that's not really the truth. You see, on this earth, we observe that both of these things do happen. In other words, yes, sediments can be laid down very quickly, as we mentioned about Mount St. Helens or Herculaneum or Pompeii or the tsunamis in Japan and Indonesia or various other places around the world where we can see that things happen. You know, like the Great Bay in Alaska where the mountain slid off and caused a great tsunami. So then, if both things can happen, that is to say both explanations, both theories can happen and do happen, then it is logical to assume that we do not have to choose between them. And it's not a question of the strength of our faith if we take one side over the other. It's rather that we have to look at more than just the surface evidence. We have to look deeper to come up with a way to find the true answers. This is not about winning a debate or an argument. It's not about making knee-jerk reaction theories that assume one thing over another has to be the only truth, when it is overwhelmingly apparent that both things happen. In other words, sediments can be laid down over a long period of time, or sediments can be laid down over a quick period of time. I'll give you another example. It is true that fossilization can take a very short time. In other words, shorter than previously thought. Mineralization, however, also mimics fossilization. There is a steel or an iron ladder in South America. I believe it's in Belize or Colombia or somewhere. I've seen multiple pictures of it. It's been circulating the internet lately. But this ladder was put there in the year 1937 or so. Maybe it was 27, maybe it was 47. Yeah, I don't really remember. It's been a while since I actually went and looked at what year the ladder was put there. However, we know that this ladder is modern. That is to say, within the last century. But since this ladder was installed, it has become mineralized via a waterfall that comes and goes with seasonal rains, that is to say, monsoonal rains. And yet the ladder looks as though it is fossilized, because it has the appearance of being covered with many layers of hard sedimentary rocks, or sedimentary layers. However, the ladder is not old enough to be truly fossilized, like, say, a petrified forest tree. Yet it looks as though it is fossilized. So again, we have two key things here which are true. Fossilization can take a very long time, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years. And things can also be covered to look fossilized, or even to be fossilized to a certain degree of speaking, within less than a century. So again, we're presented with two truths. We're presented with two facts, that things happen on this world that we live in two different ways. But that doesn't mean we have to accept one as the truth and deny the other, especially when the evidence shows us that both happen. It does not mean that we must choose between faithful Christians who say a thing and secular science who say a thing, when both are right in their observation of how things happen. So then the real and true answers are a little more complicated than we want to believe. And I guess it really comes down to faith. That is to say, your faith in God or your faith in something else, such as science, which is not God. And I think that's the real acid test of this flesh age, this earth age. So, with that being said, let's pick this up where we left off in the last talk. We're going to talk about some of the theories which seem to be on shaky ground and are quite flimsy. There is the younger Dryas, the older Dryas, and the oldest Dryas hypotheses. Now, we're going to begin with the oldest Dryas, which is, of course, the oldest one, which supposedly took place around 17,500 years ago to 20,000 years ago. And it was an alleged warming that happened during or between ice ages and a glacial retreat. I'm not going to spend much time on these because they don't really merit too much of our attention. They're simply theories. They don't have a lot to back them up. After the oldest Dryas, there is the older Dryas, which happened around 14,000 years ago, where there was also, according to science, a period of general warming and glacial melt-off. And then there's a period of cooling called the younger Dryas, a period of recooling, if you were, where it is postulated that cooling happened for whatever reason upon the Earth. The biggest going theory as far as the younger Dryas is that a comet strike happened to the Earth around 13,000 years ago, 12,800, 13,000 years ago, somewhere in that timeline. And they claim that it caused the destruction of many advanced civilizations, and that's where a lot of our technology and a lot of our people that knew how to build pyramids and the like disappeared off to. And, you know, that of course, maybe there's a little bit of sense to that, but not very much. But anyway, there was a recooling and a refreeze, and then finally came the end of the Ice Age, and as it has been since that time, the ice has been melting back steadily in a fairly steady increase, But science, of course, uses this to push climate change doctrine, climate change agenda on man. However, it is interesting to note that in these theories of Dryas, oldest, older, and youngest, there are fluctuations at least of the ice age, or ice ages as the case may be, fluctuation in the growth of ice and the decline of ice. No matter which way it is, these theories are largely speculative, offering little to no concrete proof, but rather large amounts of theory, guesswork, and other things. And like most theories, they are a set of newer, more modern theories. And speaking of new and more modern theories, which we had just alluded to, these are the kinds of things that gave rise to the belief in man-made climate change, which has about as much proof as the Dryas theories. In other words, we know since about 14,000 years ago, the ice has been declining from where it was 14,000 years ago, even unto now. And it's been a fairly steady decline. And science is ringing the warning bell and saying, oh my God, the Earth's about to end because of, you know, we're burning up due to greenhouse gases. But 14,000 years ago even was long before man was ever mechanized. So you've got a lot of so-called scientists, a lot of so-called learned experts who espouse this nonsense and look foolish when it comes to the evidence. And regardless of that, the narrative continues as if it were completely factual, completely real. But then again, you know, who controls these narratives? Well, the usual family that controls it all, the Kennedys. Science claims that climate change has happened time and again all throughout Earth's 4.6 billion year history, as they claim. And they say it's due to greenhouse gases caused by volcanoes, caused by various things like rises and declines in sea temperature. And again, all of this before mankind was anything but a hunter-gatherer, anything before man was ever mechanized, and certainly before man was burning fossil fuels to any amount necessary to cause any such effect. So then, in effect, what am I saying? They are convicting themselves by their own words, showing that they are, in fact, not objective, not really that scientific, but are indeed pushing a fantasy narrative in which the evidence does not truly back up what they claim. I mean, it was not so long ago, back in the 1970s, when they were claiming that the Earth was going to enter a freezing climate. We were going to die of global cooling, that there were going to be new ice ages that came forth. And where'd all that go? Well, it changed with the narrative. In other words, it was a bunch of crap to start with. I mean, think of how many times Al Gore said that all the coasts of America were going to be underwater, that Kilimanjaro wasn't going to be around anymore, and here we are, coastline's still in the same place, Kilimanjaro's still there with snows on top of it, North Pole's still there, and, you know, take that, Al Gore. But with regards to these prehistoric theories of climate change of people, and I say just coming and going, or what have you, declining and moving forward, it could point to the fact that there have been several ice ages. And it could also point, if we believe some of the data, according to the evidence of human existence upon the Earth, that at least some kind of humans were here. Obviously, if there was any life upon this Earth, it was something that God created, whether it was angelic, whether it was a different kind of body, whether it was just humans existing earlier than we think by the calendar. Is it possible that humans have been around for a longer time than we believe? Well, yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later on. Would it conflict with the Bible if humans had been around? Well, that is a point of contention that we will have to explore. It seems that we are told consistently more and more that humans were on this earth longer than 14,000 years ago. Some say as long as 28,000 years ago. That is to say, for what they call modern Homo sapiens. And some say before that they've been around 100,000. Others claim 250,000, 300,000. And now there's a whole new group of scientists that claim, oh no, it's half a million. And then on top of that, you got a group that's finding evidence that says, well, we have found evidence of the proto-human, that is to say the pre-modern human, up to a million and a half years ago. The problem is that few scientists agree on any real definitive timeline. This is largely because the data is confusing, very irregular, mostly speculative, and incomplete. In other words, they don't know. But just as it is with the denominations in Christianity, very few scientists agree on a definitive timeline about these theories. And this is largely because the data is confusing, very irregular, and mostly speculative. And so far from what I can see, not very factual. Now there are some evidences which are interesting to look at, such as Clovis spear points, which are apparently made of stone or from flint, and other primitive tools that seem to suggest that there was life on Earth sometime before the biblical timeline. Even so, it does not seem to have been a very advanced form of life, or a technologically advanced form of life. If there were such primitive human beings using such primitive hunting tools, there is virtually no record of these so-called people that exist beyond lore and the above-mentioned theories. That, however, alone does not disprove the theory, but certainly is far from any form of real ironclad proof. What we do know is that there are very ancient cities which did exist, but no one knows exactly how old they are, nor how they were actually built. And some of them are marvels that can't really be explained. When we look at their intricate and ultra-sophisticated construction, it seems like they were made by an advanced technology. But it's my guess that they are in fact much older than 13,000 or 20,000 years, probably leading more into the first Earth age rather than being of this age, when man was so primitive. Now, just because men of the past were less technologically defined as we, that doesn't necessarily make them primitives as far as innovations of their own time. But given what we know about them being mostly savage, clannish hunter-gatherers, it is probably not likely that they built such advanced structures. There are pyramids and structures found around the world, even under the sea, which seem to suggest some sort of civilization existed on Earth anywhere from 120,000 years ago upwards to 300,000 years old, or possibly even older. But the question really becomes, are they of this flesh age? Or are they remnants of the first Earth age? In other words, in a time around the time of the Katabole, which is to say the beginning, or the Katabala. I would not want to say that they were involved in the Katabole, because the Katabole means the very beginning and could stretch back millions of years. Again, God's children being upon the earth, yet not in flesh. One thing is clear, though, at least according to the fossil record, is that both the dinosaurs and mammoths, as well as a large variety of other creatures, do appear in the fossil record, apparently at vastly different times in the geological timeline. In other words, certainly beyond 1 million years. Maybe more than that. They are found years apart. So why is that? Well, the fact is we just really do not know. Certainly not to the full. You see, currently science tells us all of the things that we know or are taught about dinosaurs and or mammoths and or modern man. But the more secular scientific views currently control the largest portion of what is being told to us by science. And this is an official narrative. So naturally they claim that life has been around for at least 1 million years, possibly more, in a continuous succession of evolution. But science also says there have been a number of great kill-offs, another great mass extinctions, and again they love to run around the number 95%. In other words, 95% and each extinction was killed off, but 5% survived. Now naturally, if you're a scientist that doesn't believe in God, you have to use this as part of your narrative for evolution and your theories to work. Because it must be continually be espoused and taught that some form of life survived all the way through, or else the whole house of cards collapses. Now, most of this is probably half-truths, guesses, best guesses, probabilities, or absolutely not true at all. There is also a very hush-hush attitude amongst many scientists about finds which they cannot explain. And even for the things which really they probably can explain, it goes against their own current theories, so they will not explain them. So they fail to divulge these things to the public. I could give you some quick examples. We know that the Norse, that is to say Vikings, visited this nation before the founding of this nation in the visits here in the 1400s, 1500s, and the final foundation of the colonies beginning in 1603. But there were Norse here. There have been Roman ships found off the coast of South America. There are Greek writings in America. There are Hebrew writings. There are even dated Hebrew tablets and writings found in New Mexico which date them to about 110 BC. Yet they're still using the old Paleo Hebrew instead of the New Median Block Hebrew, which should have been in place by that time. So what does that mean? Well, it could mean that they were a sect of Israel, or even Jews that had been separated from the other captivity Jews, and that somehow made their way across the sea and came here and were using the old Paleo Hebrew language. Now, we live in a world where it is assumed that man could have not have crossed the sea in before Columbus. That is why we have Columbian history. However, it's ludicrous to think that, because Roman ships are quite large. Ships before, I mean, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, which came over here with Columbus, were an average of 40 feet long. There are Roman ships that were much bigger than that. The Greeks, the Phoenicians, many peoples had bigger ships, and it doesn't even really have to be a bigger ship to cross the ocean. If they got caught up in the trade winds and what we now call the shipping lanes, it's easy to see that they could have arrived here in America. But there are other things hidden from us by science. For instance, there are things which we know that science fails to divulge to the public. Why? Because possibly they would prove the existence of things that they cannot explain, like giants. For instance, there are written historical accounts of giants from all over the world. The majority of them describing these men as hairy or having reddish or blondish red hair. And according to history, that is to say, history outside of the narrative, the Smithsonian Institution has collected over 1,530 specimens from around America alone. But for some reason, the Smithsonian Institution has decided to keep these discoveries a big secret. So what was it they discovered? Giants. Giant bones. Not only skeletal, but the remains of giants. The clothes of giants, the shoes of giants, and many other things which apparently the Smithsonian has disavowed any knowledge of. But why? I mean, isn't the Smithsonian all about keeping the record straight and displaying, you know, what has been found around the world? Well, the short answer is no. You see, there is a narrative going on, and people of a secular mindset, whether they are scientists or not, will not show or display anything which might actually confirm anything in the Bible, such as giant carcasses or giant bones. We have seen in many cases where things have been found that have either been labeled as frauds or totally dismissed or have somehow disappeared. And the Smithsonian denies having any knowledge of them, nor do they confirm any such discovery. Although there are people around the country who have receipts given to their predecessors, their grandparents, their great-grandparents, where the Smithsonian took possession of giant bones from their property. But the Smithsonian would have you believe that none of these have ever even existed. Yet again, historical records outside of the Smithsonian find that the Smithsonian took possession of these things. Yet the Smithsonian, when questioned about them, disavows any knowledge of them. In fact, many scientists have even taken an interest in this, and they themselves, whether they are Christians or not, have given talks about such things, which have been suppressed by media or not recognized by media or institutions such as colleges and, of course, the Smithsonian. So, I mean, naturally we know that there's some kind of narrative going on here. Now, beyond these, in Native American history, there are places in America where it can be documented, caves and such, where Native Americans apparently did battle with giants. These are documented places. They're sites that you can go and visit. There is this one particular cave in Nevada, I believe it's called Lovelock Cave, but I have sat there and watched multiple videos about this cave that was near a lake where the giants were attacking the American Indians and apparently cannibalizing them. And the Indians finally had enough of it and went in and filled the cave mouth with a bunch of wood and sawgrass and stuff like that and set it on fire. And then when scientists came along and explored these caves, they found that, sure enough, there were the remnants of giants there. Large shoes, large spears, large things. And outside of this, you've got many documented things written in the captain's logs of people like Cabeza de Vaca, Fernando de Soto, and other people that visited South America where they ran into giants that were living amongst the Native Americans. And all of these are discounted by history and ignored. You don't hear anything spoken about them at college, but there are plenty of videos here on YouTube showing the proof of these things, that is to say, the written proof, and cataloged things that showed depictions of giants walking around with the Native Americans and their pictographs that they drew, or paintings. So then that begs the question, why is all of this being hidden from us? Why are there giants or people above 7 foot, 8 foot tall that live in Sardinia? I mean, and even have a heritage claim that they are the descendants of giants that left the land of Palestine because of being driven out by the Israelites. But again, all of this is ignored. All of it is shoved under the carpet so that no one can see it. Why? Because it would prove biblical truth. But let's go back to the span and age and what events might actually mean, or what might have actually happened versus the official narrative and what is currently taught or supposed. Is it not possible that in the first Earth age, given its exceedingly long duration, even according to the Bible and according to what we know of Earth, also had sub-ages and events surrounding the overthrow where Satan attempted to overthrow God? I mean, all one has to do is read the Bible in Ezekiel 28, Isaiah 14, and various other places, where Lucifer was made the full pattern of beauty and wisdom. And he was not immediately evil, but had been good and pleasing to God, even earning himself a spot as one of God's protecting cherubims. We also know that he corrupted himself over a period of time. And in that instant, when he corrupted himself, even God had patience with him and did not kill him. Now there are unexplainable discrepancies in the so far known timeline, and there are plenty of points of contention about the timeline between secular science, between Christianity. They continuously do battle over these things. In short, maybe the events from the beginning to the final overthrow, or to the katabalo, in fact took eons of time. Maybe Lucifer was a good angel for a very long time, very pleasing to God, until he began to corrupt himself. And I'm not saying that that couldn't have happened quickly, but it seems to me, giving the presumed age of Earth, that it was over an exceedingly long period of time. Because when understood from the biblical texts, there are long time spans given to man, that is to say, not man in the flesh, but men of old. And there are also no dates given for when God created the earth, only that it happened. And apparently, from what we can see all around us, in different parts of the world, the earth is massively old. Perhaps the timeline as we know it is not exactly accurate. For that matter, maybe it's not even close. Perhaps things have been overlooked and misunderstood. Perhaps information has been withheld omitted or censored, whatever. It is enough, in fact, for God to tell us the things that have happened in the Bible. In other words, that He is the creator of heaven and earth. We should have no other God before Him. That Satan fell from grace. That we are now in this flesh age, and that we have free will, and we have this choice to make. Whether we're going to serve God, or Satan, or the wiles of the flesh, what have you. No real need to go into specifics about stuff like that. Man has a difficult enough time grasping the information that is written and the information that he looks at without having to constantly sit in a permanent conundrum of things that can really probably never truly be answered to the full. And let's talk about the flesh for a minute. Perhaps flesh man, that is to say, from the sixth-day creation, has been on the earth longer than we think. In other words, we know that God created mankind on the sixth day. He rested on the seventh day. On the eighth day, He looked around and saw that there was no man to till the field. And then He created Adam. That is to say, Et ha-Adam, the man Adam. Certain evidence, if it is in fact dated correctly and properly by science, seem to point to such a conclusion. There are cave paintings found that have been carbon dated back to more than 12 or 14, some say 25,000 years, depending on where they are in the world. So I guess the real question is, how accurate are the dates that we've been given? Have they been manipulated by man? Have they been tampered with? That is to say, are the readings false? Because carbon dating is supposed to be accurate to within 50,000 years. Even though Earth dates and carbon dates are different, carbon dates are less than Earth dates. One thing I do know is that science is constantly moving the bar. Science constantly changes the story, and they claim it's because that more information, more evidence is gathered, and they move man into an ever and farther ever more distant past as far as origins. So then, would it be logical to assume or to conclude that from the very first creation of flesh man, that it could have well been farther back than we think? The Bible, believe it or not, is not exactly specific as to when this happened. It only says it happened on the sixth day. And most of what is believed currently is based upon assumptions made by the dates of lifespans of characters from biblical history. But that is not an exact method of dating either. It is written in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, that God created the heavens and the earth. There's no date given for that. That's just a merely stated fact. When Moses penned that, scribed it, he simply was pointing out that God is the creator of the heavens and the earth. In verse 2, it is written that the earth was without void and without form. But if we go and check out the word was, we find out that it is more accurately translated became void and without form, because Isaiah 45 tells us that God did not create the world void and without form. He created it to be inhabited. He did not create it tohu vabohu. Didn't create it that way. So now we know that something happened to cause it to be made void and without form. Obviously the katabalo is the cause of that, the great overthrow. However, as spoken in the first episode of this lecture, there are those of faith who assume that creation was 6,000 to 7,000 years ago, that the earth is no longer than 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. And this is based on the work of early theologians and modern calculations of the biblical timeline, again from the historical characters in the Bible. And we know that these historical characters do exist, because many of them are historically written of in other places, and not only that, their remains are found upon the earth, their graves, places that they spent time, places that they created. But in assuming the earth is very young, Christians are not only at odds with things written in the Bible, but they are at odds with scientific evidence. Now, there's many things in scientific that Christians have every right to be at odds with. But if the science is objectively done, then we need to look further and see, why is the evidence telling us this? And not only that, there's quite a lot of evidence which is seemingly ignored by Christians merely because it is contrary to the young earth creation belief doctrine, and for seemingly no other reason. Now again, it is written that God created this earth, that is to say, this earth age, if one is to understand what is truly written in the Hebrew, in 6 days, and God rested on the seventh day. Now, the Answers in Genesis people will tell you that the days are 24-hour periods. However, what does God tell us about days in the Bible? Naturally, there are 24-day periods, or excuse me, 24-hour periods. But if we use the key given to us in the New Testament of 2 Peter chapter 3, which concerns God's lifespan, the days in the life of God, then the creation alone, with God's Sabbath, or that is to say his day of rest, as opposed to a 24-hour day, would be 7,000 years of its own. That is to say, the 6 days of creation and God's Sabbath, God's day of rest. It is not known for absolute which length of day is referred to, but I'm assuming, since God gave us the key to understand that what his life is like compared to our lives, that it did take him 1,000 years. It may not have taken him that long, but God does not necessarily do anything fast. Look how patient he is with us. So is the day being referred to in Genesis, where it comes to the days of creation and the Sabbath day, is that one day? That is to say, a 24-hour period, or is it 1,000 years? Well, logically, most likely it's a day in God's life, since he himself rested a day, and what would a day be to God? I mean, it would be a 24-hour period, not to God. Plus, we have the fact that after Eve's seduction and Adam's sin with her and with Satan, Adam did not die the same day as God told him he would. That is to say, if we're looking at 24-hour periods. No, rather, Adam lived to be 930 years old. But he did die before he reached 1,000 years of age. Meaning that by God's calendar, by God's date, he did die on the same day. In other words, he died in the day that he partook of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is to say, Satan, the serpent. So these things are largely skipped over, ignored, or not looked into, certainly not from the standpoint of scholarly due diligence. It is ignored by some and assumed by others that on the 8th day, God went back to work. In other words, he created Adam and then Eve on the 8th day. You know, from the DNA of Adam came Eve. Yet, when we read this, there is no 8th day written of in our Father's Word, no phrase which states, and the evening and the morning were the 8th day. In other words, all we do read is, there was no man to till the field, and God caused the dew to fall upon the earth, and God made a man of the dust of the earth, and breathed into his nostril the breath of life, and the man became a living soul. And this is, of course, Eth Ha-Adam, or the man, Adam. Now, maybe God did go back to work after the seventh day, but there are many things God could have done. Not everything is written of what God does. I mean, what does God do on the day of his daily life now? Not really written, is it? I mean, we can assume, we can guess. We can go by other things written that, well, that probably concludes us to what God does every day, whether in a 24-hour day for us or, you know, if you really think about this, Christ was here 2 days ago by God's calendar. Moses was here 3.5 days ago by God's calendar. But we don't really know what God does on a daily basis. Now, the Christian people from Answers in Genesis have discounted 6,000 or 7,000 years worth of creation time and God's Sabbath to add to the 6,000 years of known history that they claim has been. In other words, since the creation of Adam and so on and thus forth. So if we add all that together, what would we come up with? Well, we would come up to about 13,000 years since God began creating this earth to the current age of the current day. And there are some interesting facts that you could look at about the population of Earth. I don't want to go too deep into this, but I will mention some things. Currently, the world population, the biggest race upon the earth are the Asian people. Now, does God favor the Asians more than he favors everyone else? No, not particularly. All are God's children. But why are they larger than the rest of us? You know, we're talking about China, Japan, Korea, parts of Mongolia, the Philippines, parts of Indonesia, Indochina, and all the migrations to where all the Asians have gone. Next, you have the people of India. People of India, massively large group of people, 27, 28% of people, maybe more. Then you have Native Americans, that is to say, not Indians from India, but Native Americans, which would include the American Indian tribes, from Alaska to Peru, from northern Canada, Peru, I probably should say, better said. The Mexican peoples, a large portion of the South American that are not Spain-descended people, probably even some of the Polynesians, people connected to Asian, Indian, or Mongolian patriarchies. And then we have the African people. And how much are they upon there? 14%, 15%, 20%, something around that neighborhood? Then next we have the Abrahamics. The Abrahamics. In other words, this would be Arabians, Middle Easterners, Lebanese, people, Turkey, Mesopotamia, the white, ruddy-complected Adamic, Caucasian, the majority of so-called whites around the earth, European, Scandinavian, Russian, American, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand, Tasmanian, Jewish, which would also go in with Middle Eastern, South African, etc., etc. And then we have the Aboriginal peoples. Aboriginal people such as in Australia, New Zealand, places like that, tribal people. Now, and they are the least number. So this also brings up, interesting questions about Noah. Who was on the ark with Noah? And if no one was on the ark with Noah because only 8 Adamic souls were saved, then where did the races come from? I mean, if the flood was worldwide, the races either had to be on the ark Likewise, should have been the dinosaurs, the mammoths, the saber-toothed tigers, blah, blah, blah. But if the word Eretz from the Hebrew only means a region, in other words, the flood was regional, a very big region, but not the entire world, then that would explain Chinese history, Asian history. It would explain Indonesian history, things which predate Caucasian history by quite a substantial sum. One would expect the 6-day creation of man to have a head start on the Adamic peoples, and their numbers would be superior, that is to say higher, and especially if there was a larger span of time between what we call 6-day creation and the creation of Adam. I know that Pastor Murray from Shepherd's Chapel says Adam is 8th-day creation. But is he really 8th-day creation just because Pastor Murray says so? Having studied under Pastor Murray myself for a very long time, I have gone into these very scriptures myself, and there's nothing to indicate that he was created on the 8th day. 8th day does mean new beginnings. I think that's one of the reasons it's probably a decent idea to look into that. But then if that is true, where do these paints and pigments come from on the walls of caves? Or are they just dated wrong? Interesting questions to ponder. Like I told you at the very beginning of this is only going to lead to more questions. We're never going to come to a complete answer here. Now, when considering the numbers of Earth ethnicity, there are factors which have to be taken into consideration, such as wars, natural disasters, diseases, available medicines, that is, and knowledge of medicine to the people, accidental death, lifestyle hardship, or other hazards such as terrain, rural dwellings, desert and mountainous and coastal regions, and non-fruitful lands where there has been famine. All these things can increase or decrease a population. And there's one thing that I should point out about all this. None of this is a salvation issue, okay? There are people that will tell you, if you don't believe in a young earth, then you won't believe any of the truth. Who made them a judge? There are some that say, if you don't believe in an old earth, you cannot possibly know the truth. Okay, well, who made them a judge? There are things we will never understand to the full, but they are not salvation issues. What is a salvation is your relationship with your Lord and Savior. Your relationship with God our Father. God will not condemn a faithful soul for misunderstanding or ignorance. In other words, will He correct them? Will He show them the truth if they ask Him? Yes, He will do those things. But whether earth is long duration or short duration, I mean, you got people out there now saying, if you don't believe the earth is round, you cannot be saved. If you don't believe the earth is flat, you cannot be saved. I mean, where does it end? It seems to me that all these are strife points, points of division, reasons to separate brothers from brothers in Christianity. That's not the spirit of Philadelphia. How much of the Bible, or how much of God, is not covered in regards with what's written in the Bible? How much is not covered with regards to times and reasons why things happened? That is to say, so that everybody could pick up the Bible and read it and understand it. Why did Christ speak in parables? I mean, it's obvious that not everyone was meant to understand. Why? Because there is a millennium coming. A millennium when probably far more people are going to be saved than were ever saved in this flesh age, quite frankly. This world we live in is an age of free will. It's an age of choice. It's a great test. And maybe God wanted there to always be a question in people's minds of this or that or the other, and to see whether they would stick to what is really important or whether they would separate and draw lines in the sand over these little stupid things. Maybe he wanted to see whether they would take man's word, man's perceptions, man's theories, man's science, and man's philosophers over his word. Who knows? I mean, people have certainly gone to war for these things. They've certainly killed a lot of people in the world for these things. In the name of religion, in the name of science. Isn't it just a little bit possible that the creation of Adam might have come later at some point than what most academics think? Given the numbers of people on the earth, I would say that's a very plausible, sensible way to look at things. Whether it's true or not, I have no idea. I'll tell you what does not make sense, though. A 6,000-year-old Earth does not make sense to me. Now, it may make sense to you. That doesn't mean that we can't be friends. You can't still be my brother in Christ or anything else. It just means that when I look around the world and I look at all the sciences, plus the Word of God, and where they walk hand in hand, I see an older Earth. And that, of course, is based upon if the evidence that I'm looking at is interpreted right. If the dates that I'm reading, in fact, are true or not. I have as much right to be mistaken as the next guy. And interpretation basically comes down to the eye of the beholder and what they believe or what they might have been indoctrinated into, or whether they're objective, open-minded thinkers. And I don't mean, you know, you have to be open-minded in everything. Being open-minded too much allows your brain to fall out and hit the ground, okay? That's just the way it is. There are things upon this earth which suggest that man has been around, certainly, a long time. Possibly 20,000 years, maybe longer. Again, paintings in cave, carbon dated. Organic materials used in them. But are they from this earth age or the previous earth age? Well, when we think of the technology that must have been available to us in the first earth age, the great cities and the unknown power sources and all the things that are constantly talked about science, about knowledge lost by man, it only makes sense to me that, hey, primitives would not have been able to do that. And people that are cave painting, I mean, look at the kind of painting people can do now. Look at the fantastic art that's available in our world. Why would they have painted so rudimentary? Why would they have drawn things in caves? Unless they were primitives. Is there another possibility? Well, probably. Maybe in the first earth age we were a lot more innocent and more childlike. I don't know. I do know that people were smart enough to know to turn their for God and stand with God, and other people were not smart enough to know to do that and followed Satan. So then it comes down to things like carbon dating of organic materials, these cave paintings, evidence is showing people drawing mammoths, drawing long dead animals. Now, carbon dating years, admittedly, are off, as I had alluded to earlier. The margin of the calendar year goes back farther than carbon dating years. And carbon dating has discrepancies in it, and it can be tainted. In other words, the Shroud of Turin was dated, and it was inaccurately dated because of the carbon from a fire in the 12th century or so. How far can they go back with carbon dating? Well, I've talked to a few people about this, and I've watched a lot of scientists talking about it. 50,000 years seems to be the farthest back they can go without creating more radiation. If they use more radiation, they believe they could possibly reach 60,000 years. But 50,000 years seems to be the zenith of ability to carbon date. And when carbon dating is used, it's not just carbon and carbon dating that they use. They use things like tree rings, coral samples, and known or at least postulated sedimentary dating as relative dating. And these play a role in deriving the number of years. However, I have found two schools of thought which conflict with each other. Group A says carbon dates are less than calendar years. Group B says that carbon dates are more than calendar years. So there's a discrepancy there. However, the margin is not that great. But back to time. Given the supposed technology which dates from those times, that is to say, way back when, it seems that man would have had to have far more technology and would have been able to be far more artistic, and again would not have made such rudimentary drawings of mammoths, saber-toothed cats, or other long extinct dead animals, or blown paint out of their mouth around their hand, or even dipped their hand in paint and stuck it on a wall. Now, some say that things found on the earth from those times correspond or were done by visitors from other worlds that gave man knowledge. And again, we go back to the Star Trek mentality here. In other words, extraterrestrials. The only extraterrestrials I know of are Nephilim, fallen angels. It doesn't seem to me that there are aliens. But even if there were proof of aliens, and I mean ironclad proof of aliens, not just lights far off in the distance or shapes of lights in the sky in the shape of a cigar or a pyramid, or people's stories of being abducted, or people's stories of meeting aliens. I would doubt that if there was an advanced culture above us that were not Nephilim, that they would come here and do such rudimentary paintings either, if they were so highly advanced. These cave paintings show simplistic style. They show hunts. They show extinct animals. Meaning they are the depictions, in my mind, of hunter-gatherers, which were, of course, the first peoples created by God upon the earth. A flesh man might have very well made such crude works. But a highly advanced form of life, let's say aliens, or even Nephilim, would not have done so. Primitive peoples could have done such things, such crude artworks. And they would have carved Clovis points out of flint or out of rocks. But even so, those would not have been half man, half apes. You know, we're led to believe that because scientists take the bones of apes and stand them up right now and shave off all the hair and say, this was our ancestor. I would rather think that they would have had to have been more modern man, even with primitive tools, pigments, and crude art. Or again, perhaps they were crudely done in the First Earth Age, for whatever reason. I don't really give any credence whatsoever to theories of so-called cavemen, of primates that evolved via adaptation or Darwinist evolution. You see, science has now finally begun to awaken to the reality that evolution was never possible. Now, I know some are going to have a heart attack hearing that, because this is still in its infancy with science. But the fact and the reality of this, the whole body of science found that claims that men evolved from apes is a bunch of loosely disassociated fossils, which are clearly the bones of some primate, no doubt an ape, or even an ape similar to a modern ape, but still an ape, which secular science claims to be our ancestors. And all of the evidence gathered, and I mean all of the evidence gathered, would fit into a small U-Haul trailer. And again, it's highly skeptical. It's disassociated bones. Much as like was done with the dinosaurs when they were first stacked up and claimed that this dinosaur existed and that dinosaur existed. And then later, more learned men of science came along and restructured the dinosaurs and gave them different names. The evidence that they have now for evolution is more damning and confusing than it is conclusive. Where is the evidence of mankind's evolution? Apes, the early first stage of primates, being the most simple, as said by Darwin and as said by evolution, are present with us today, along with mankind, which is the latest stage, as said by Darwinist evolution and secular science. But where are the intermediate stages? They don't exist. Where are they? Where are all these Neanderthals? You know, as far as I'm aware, not one evidence of Neanderthal communication has been established. They are not a people that had a language, if they were a people at all. And as a matter of fact, if we look at the Neanderthal, what do they look most like? An ape. Again, what has been done here? The same thing that was done with Turkana Boy. The same thing that was done by people like Dr. Louis Leakey, who thought they were doing something good. They have stood up the bones of apes, and extinct primates, and said these were our ancestors. Darwin has claimed that as each stage developed, its predecessor stage seemed to simply die out. In other words, they claim that Australopithecine to Cro-Magnon died out after they had born the next stage. The Homo erectus died out. The Neanderthal died out. The Homo habilis died out. So all that we're left with is the beginning stage, the apes, and us, the human beings. Modern Homo sapiens. So why do we still have the ape, the first stage, and us, the last stage? Why are there no Cro-Magnons walking around? Why are there no Neanderthals walking around? Why are there no Australopithecine? What about all the other stages that have been lately named? Where are they? Where are the stages of them? And why did evolution just stop making them? In other words, in short, what this comes down to is everything that we've been told and taught is highly, highly questionable and a spurious fossil record made by man. Does that make any kind of sense? Does it make sense, period? As far as breeding or development or evolving is concerned, why is it that cats can breed with other cats but not with dogs? Why is it that dogs can breed with other dogs but not with cats? Why is it a horse and donkey can breed to make a mule but the mule cannot breed? In other words, an elephant and a horse cannot breed. A cow and a mule cannot breed. A mouse and a fish cannot breed. So there are a lot of things that seem to be missing from this puzzle of how man evolved. In other words, there have been no mass extinction, according to science, in the last, 60, 80,000 years, unless you go to the Younger Dryas, which is on shaky ground anyway. As a matter of fact, most scientists will tell you that nothing really has happened with man over the last 500,000 years. With regards to those that believe the Ice Age began 2 million or 5 million years ago. And with the exception in the Bible of reading about the earth becoming void and without form, being destroyed, that is, because of Satan's attempt to make a coup d'etat of God, there's nothing else. Nothing else that we can point to. And in any case, no one is even sure when those events happened. And some don't even believe those events happened. Now, here's another thought. Knowing the sexuality of man and his great lust for sex, and especially if they were evolving men, where are the numbers of humans that should exist by now if man had existed for, let's say, 500,000 years? 1,000,000 years. Yeah, where are they? The earth should have been long overpopulated a long time ago. Now, science has all kinds of bottleneck theories about natural disasters and climatic change and stuff like that. And science is highly divided. Some people claim that man has been evolving for 200,000 years, 250,000. Others say 400,000. And still others have now say 1,000,000. Others say beyond that. So then, if this is true, why is the earth not overpopulated? Again, surely knowing man and how he is capable of procreating and his mass appetite for sexual pleasure, you would think that there'd be a massive amount of people, but where are the bones of all these people? Why are there such small numbers that are stuck together and called cavemen? Where have they all gone, since they do not appear in the fossil record, except in small numbers, which are most likely the bones of different things stacked together to make or the bones of an ape stacked up to look like a man. And someone draws on the picture and depicts him as having no hair on his face and being bent over and hunched over and maybe being bipedal or maybe being quadrupedal. In other words, all of this is questionable at best and provable not a bit. There is not the staggering amount of evidence that science claims. Though science has taken steps to lead us into believing that the evidence is overwhelming and all-consuming. The fact is, the evidence that they have to present is meager, to the point of laughable, and hardly any scientific proof of anything, except that some scientists have done an awful lot of work trying to indoctrinate people to believe their theories in a quest to explain a continuity that doesn't really exist. It is one thing to believe that man evolved from a common primate that also spawned apes. But it's quite another to know the nature of mankind and his conquest, and of course his sexual desires and ability to produce in huge numbers, and then to say that, well, they did produce in these huge numbers, but then they all died out. And then their bones just rotted away, even though we have bones of things far older preserved. There's no evidence to show where they all went. There's no evidence to show that they were here at all. So what do we have? We have a Swiss cheese delusion. In other words, we've got a bunch of theories that anyone could poke holes into, with a bunch of missing links that science claims one day will be found, but are only seen in depictions or in the bones of apes which are stood upright. In other words, hung on on metal scaffoldings and stuff as upright beings, even though they're not proportional to a human being. I know there's going to be somebody out there from the scientific community that says, well, they're not supposed to be proportional. They were in evolution. Okay, what about the evidence of their cranial ridges? Now, we know that there were some skulls found that have the connection to the spine in the center of the skull. However, most of the things that are found do not have that connection. This is one reason why it is possible that man has been around far longer than we think. Only not as caveman, not as half man, half ape, not as Cro-Magnon, not as Neanderthal necessarily. No, what we've got is a bunch of ideas, a bunch of postulations, and a bunch of depictions in artwork displaying apes as hairless, dressed with loincloths, holding spears. And this narrative and agenda has fooled quasi-millions of people into believing this secular founded dogma. But evolution is believed by secular science. And they say that there were proto-humans that surely existed. And they point to species which, again, are largely more apish than man, and probably, in fact, are the bones of extinct apes. Look how many things have gone extinct just in our lifetime. So are they, in fact, human? Are they ancestors of humans, or are they just primates? Are they just dead apes or extinct apes? Well, all we need to do is look at them. All we need to do is closer examine them. Science may portray them as standing upright and remove their facial hair and depict them as wearing claws and carrying spears made of flint. But when looked at closely, they're the bone of apes. I mean, all you really need to do is examine one. Some of them look like gibbons. You know? The thing is, if you want to push an agenda, if you are so addicted or indoctrinated to a belief that you must push it because you like the look, smell, and feel of it, then of course you're going to depict early humans by removing their hair and quadrupedal nature and making them stand upright, erect as a biped. But that does not change the fact of what they really were. That does not change the fact that their facial features, their skulls, their cranial ridges, and everything resemble an ape and nothing like a man. You know, even members of my family have argued with me about this. They said, well, maybe God just raised man up through stages. Well, not if the biblical account is true. I don't recall reading anything about man being raised up in stages. And I don't recall anything even pointing to that from the languages. And the fact that these people had no discernible language skills, no writing skills, nothing is written of them, then that tells me that there's something wrong with this picture. My conclusion in looking at the evidence is that these primate apes are not in fact human nor proto-human, but as stated already, they are extinct apes or just long dead apes similar to the type that live now. Again, look at how many species have gone extinct on this planet just in our lifetime alone because of man's interference with nature. Again, I base this on the very small number of skeletal remains that are put out there as proof. The lack of whole skeletal remains, the pieced together skulls that they throw together. Again, all of this evidence is postulations, probabilities, speculations, theories, at best. And everything that I have seen on display does not smack of ancestor of human to me. And again we come to the question, why did evolution stop? I mean, all the things are out there in the ocean still to make life. The water, the algae, the single-celled organism. Where are the two-celled organisms, the three-celled organisms, the four-celled, the five-celled organisms? Where are they? Where are the half amphibians and half fish, half marsupials coming up onto the shore? Why did evolution happen one time only and stop? What governs it? If there's no intelligent design, if there's no creator? Well, first of all, evolution doesn't happen. Some scientists would gasp to hear me say, or to hear anyone say that evolution has stopped. They would say it's just slow. It just goes too slow for us to see, except in the fossil record. You know, a meager number of fossils, mind you. However, if life just happened without governance, and if evolution was true, then why is it that we do not see every stage of every animal from the beginning to now in all their mixes and all their adaptations? Because all the same elements, all the same minerals, all the same water and algae and cells are out there that have always been. And again, if it's not governed, why did it happen only one time? And then why did it say, okay, enough of this model, we're moving on to the next model, and all of you old model can just die off. All you Cro-Magnons can die off. We're moving on to the next one. All of you Neanderthals can just die off. We're moving on to the next one. All of you Homo habilis can just die off. We're moving on to the next one. Now, I know some science will say, well, it was based on natural selection and survival of the fittest. Really? Then why is the ape still alive? Surely he was way more primitive than anything else. Why are they still around? And all the different kinds of apes. Chimpanzees, gibbons, little circus monkeys, whatever you want to call them, orangutans, gorillas. There are many things alive on this earth which are certainly not the fittest when compared to the things that prey on them, and yet they still exist. So what was or what is the method or mechanism by which science claims that brought those life forms to their end? From the primordial oozes from the oceans to now, why is it that evolution happened one singular time and was never able to recreate itself and spring up life again? What made whatever mechanism they believe in stop and say, no more evolving of this chain? We've had hundreds of thousands of this type, but now we're stopping it because the next version has come along. What made each phase of man come up with the next model and then the previous phase disappear in lieu of the next model? That does not make any sense. Science claimed that life is made from heat, possibly from asteroids hitting the Earth, carrying things on them, asteroids, comets, from the sun, from volcanoes, from elements, from minerals, from rain, from algae, from mold, from grass, trees, spores. And they claimed that it all just happened by accident. No intelligent to control it. Nothing to stop it, to keep it from happening, and yet it's not happening. Just some magical force and some rabbit out of the hat. Let me be clear on this. If evolution were a fact, it would not be governed by any force other than nature itself. But what is nature? Nature is the thing created by God. We would have to see all forms of life from the first to the modern. And there would have to be a record of them all the way. There would be missing no intermediate steps. There would be no missing links. But in fact, that is exactly what we do not see. And the fact that they claim that it only happened once shows that evolution is only a theory. The origins of man, as written by Darwin, is not a blueprint or a proven science. It was a theory, a failed theory. Then there's the question of DNA. DNA is the code of life in all living things. Trees, plants, grass, animals, human beings. Now science, believe it or not, agrees that DNA is a code. In fact, the longest word in humanity is DNA. In other words, it is a series of 4 letters that are coded in such a long code that it would reach from here to the sun several times over. Just for a simple life organism. Now let me ask you, what code ever wrote itself? What code ever naturally selected itself? No one can say that code writes itself. Does a book write itself? The only kind of code that can write itself is a code that was designed to write itself. As people that write viruses on a computer designed to spread them through a system of computers. But guess what? They have an author. So then who designed our DNA to write itself? Again, the longest word in the human language is not a speakable word. It is a code. The code of DNA. In either case, code, or as in the example of a computer virus, there has to be an author. It must be written. In no case does a code write itself. DNA is so complex until a single strand of it again reaches back and forth to the sun several times over. How did such a complex thing ever write itself? By accident? By chance? By just the right amount of things happening? No. The answer is it did not because it could not. God has shown us the truth, but man, simply in his hard-headedness and denial, will not accept the truth. Even when there is no other plausible or sensible or truly scientific theory. And I said truly scientific. That means objective. A book does not write itself. Life code does not write itself. DNA does not write itself. Despite what some indoctrinates or angry, self-righteous, possibly militant-minded people might say. Or try to push off on the ill-informed. In other words, we cannot observe evolution the way that they say we can. When we see animals, and we see different forms of animals, we do not see necessarily, and I say necessarily for a reason, we do not see anything but that animals bred with each other. We do not see intermediate stages. If you go to the Cambrian era, a bunch of life sprang forth with no intermediate, no ancestor. Nothing in the world happens by happenstance with regards to life. Life doesn't just happen. And nothing says, make only this many of this evolution of mankind or this creature and then stop, make a more perfected one then, and go with that one. There can be only one truth, and the truth is that God is real. God created the universe, the earth, and all life. It is not some freak of nature or accidental happenstance event. I think that's where we're going to end part 2, and we will pick this up in part 3. Let me remind you to stay in your Father's Word every day. Every day in your Father's Word is a great day. If you can't stay in it every day, certainly stay in it every week. Use the tools afforded to us to study our Father's Word. The Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, the J.P. Green's Interlinear, the Smith's Bible Dictionary, the E.W. Bullinger Companion Bible, the Septuagint, the Masoretic Text. And guess what else? Use science. Yes, I said that. Use science. But use objective science. Don't use doctrines of men. Doctrines of science that are made up by men are just as dangerous as doctrines of religion. And they're just as deadly. Brothers and sisters, always remember to pray to your Father whenever you're studying His Word. And always remember to pray for those that walk in darkness, because there are way more walking in darkness than are walking in the light. So, we'll see you in episode 3 of this lecture. May God bless you, and thank you for listening. This has been Just Thoughts.